Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into one of the most famous and, frankly, most debated texts in human history, Plato's Republic. We're going to break down an expert analysis of its historical roots, its philosophical core, and a rigorous comparative theological critique provided by our source material. We'll see exactly how this ancient masterpiece grapples with the very nature of justice and ultimately the human soul itself.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover the context of the Republic, its five-part arc, the core philosophical concepts, an intertextual and biblical critique, and finally, its legacy and modern relevance.
Section 1. Context of the Republic. Trauma and the search for stable justice.
We really can't grasp Plato's vision without first understanding the sheer political trauma of 4th century BCE Athens. I mean, the guy wasn't writing in a vacuum. He was writing in the direct aftermath of total societal collapse. Between 431 and 370 BCE, Athens was just hammered. First, a devastating military defeat in the Peloponnesian War. Then, the brutal oligarchic rule of the 30 tyrants in 404 BCE, a terrifying time of political purges. But the ultimate blow? That came in 399 BCE when a democratic Athenian jury executed Plato's beloved teacher, Socrates. This relentless string of disasters is exactly what fueled Plato's desperate search for a stable, ideal city. And out of that deep disillusionment, Plato leverages the crisis of his world to answer one massive fundamental question: how can virtue and justice actually endure in a fallen, unstable society? It's a question we're frankly still asking today. He sets out to prove, against all the cynics of his era, that living a just life is inherently better, happier, and more profitable than living an unjust one. Moving right along to Section 2, the five-part arc, from the search for justice to eternity. Plato logically builds his argument across 10 books, and it's truly a masterpiece of pacing. It kicks off in books 1 and 2 by aggressively taking down popular cynical morality. You know, that whole might makes right idea. Then, in books 2 through 4, it constructs a utopian society from scratch, outlining the first state and its education system. The narrative hits its absolute peak in books 5 through 7 with the kingdom of philosophy, before turning in books 8 and 9 to trace the tragic, inevitable cycle of political decay. Finally, book 10 wraps up with a striking vision of poetry, the soul, and eternity. Now, Plato's method for exploring all this is brilliant. He uses what's called the city-soul analogy. Basically, he uses the macrocosm of the state, the city itself, as a giant magnifying glass to understand the microcosm of the individual human soul. He argues that if we can identify justice written in large letters by constructing an ideal city or polis, we can finally understand what justice looks like inside a single, individual human being.
Which brings us to Section 3. Core philosophical concepts. The Platonic framework.
All right, let's unpack the 4 foundational ideas Plato uses to build this ideal city and human. First up is the tripartite soul. Plato argues our minds are split into 3 parts: the rational, seeking wisdom; the spirited, seeking courage and honor; and the appetitive, driven by basic desires. Think of it like your morning routine. Your alarm goes off, your appetitive part just wants to sleep, your spirited part feels the pressure to not be lazy, but your rational part knows you have a job to do and literally gets you out of bed. For Plato, true justice is perfect internal harmony, where that rational mind firmly rules over the spirit and the appetite.
And what guides that rational mind? Well, it's the idea of the good. This is the supreme principle, the ultimate cause of all truth and essence. Plato symbolizes it as the sun. Just like the physical sun gives us light and sustains life on earth, the idea of the good illuminates all truth in the intellectual world. A true leader, the philosopher-king, absolutely must grasp this concept to govern effectively.
To explain how we discover this good, Plato gives us his most famous metaphor, the allegory of the cave. Imagine people chained in a dark cave since birth, only ever seeing shadows cast on a wall, completely mistaking those shadows for reality. True education, Plato insists, isn't just cramming facts into a passive brain. It's a painful, necessary intellectual ascent. It means unchaining the prisoner, turning their soul around, and dragging them up out of the cave into the blinding light of objective truth.
But here's where things get controversial. To maintain order in this utopia, Plato proposes the noble lie. It's a fictional narrative designed to foster civic unity. Citizens are told they're all earthborn, but that the gods mix different metals into their souls: gold for rulers, silver for soldiers, and bronze for workers. It's a pretty monstrous fiction, honestly, used to forcefully justify a strict social hierarchy.
Let's shift gears now for Section 4, Intertextuality and Biblical Critique, the critic's lens. Putting on our critic's hat, let's look at how the source analysis contrasts Plato's work with the traditions around him, starting with the Greek poetic tradition of Homer and Hesiod. In a radically bold move for his time, Plato fiercely censors Homer's poetry. He completely rejects the old myths of immoral gods and the bloody pursuit of heroic glory. Instead, he adapts Hesiod's older stories, like the myth of the metals we just talked about, replacing those epic heroic values with a strictly rational pursuit of civic harmony.
But the contrasts get even more fascinating when the source analysis maps Plato's utopia against biblical theology. Where Plato defines justice as internal harmony in the soul or city, the biblical framework sees it rooted in covenantal order and grace. For rule, Plato looks to an elite philosopher-king. Biblical theology anticipates a righteous Messiah. And history? Plato sees it as a tragic cycle of political decay, while the scriptural lens views it as a linear redemptive narrative moving toward a specific end.
The analysis notes a really sharp tension here between utopian rationalism and a scriptural framework. Plato relies on elite guardians utilizing a noble lie to control the masses. This stands in stark contrast to biblical themes of covenantal equality, an absolute commitment to truthfulness, and the concept of grace, specifically through the cross, rather than just intense human intellectual effort. It really highlights the limits of utopian rationalism.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Legacy and Modern Relevance, from Athens to today.
So how did this ancient text echo through history? Well, early church fathers engaged deeply with Plato. Thinkers like Augustine actually credited Platonic insights as a crucial preparatory step, turning his mind toward immaterial reality and objective truth. But, and this is key, Augustine ultimately insisted that only Christ provides the grace to dwell in the true city of God, subordinating Plato's philosophy to scriptural revelation. He argued that human reason alone could never build true perfection.
And believe it or not, reading the Republic equips us powerfully today. It gives us the tools to diagnose our own disordered desires, like when our appetites totally hijack our reason. It equips modern thinkers to sharply critique moral relativism. It gives us a timeless argument for why we must advocate for wise, self-controlled leadership. Ultimately, it perfectly captures the universal human longing for a truly just society.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought drawn from our sources analysis. Plato's magnificent, rational utopia shows us the absolute heights of human thought, but it also glaringly exposes the limits of human-made systems. It forces us to ask a tough question. If unaided human reason ultimately falls short, where do we look to find the true city of God today? Can we ever build a perfect society on our own, or does true justice require a grace beyond ourselves? Something to think about until next time.